I promise I'm back. Good evening once again. Welcome to today's video where we are going to be looking on what we call the blood vessels tunic layers. If you find this video helpful at the end of it all, please make sure you like the video, comment down in the comment section, and please subscribe. Let's go ahead and get started. So now in this video, we are taking a look on what we call the blood vessel tunic layers. In the previous video, we looked on what we call the types of what we call the blood vessels. We looked on what we call the arteries, what we call the veins, and what we call the capillaries. In this video, we are going to go ahead and look on this kind of the cross section of the kind of the blood vessels, and we see the internal arrangement of these layers following this kind of what we call the cross section. Let's go ahead and get started. So now, when you look on this kind of the beautiful kind of the blood vessel, this one here is going to be our artery. Okay, this one here is going to be our artery. Okay, going to be our artery. And then of course, when you come over this side, this one here is going to be our vein. Here is going to be our vein. Okay. Now, we want to take a look on these kind of the layers of what we call the blood vessels. We have come out with this kind of this beautiful kind of the cross section. We have just cut this kind of this blood vessel. We are looking at it on the internal arrangement of this kind of these layers. You're going to be labeling them from inside going outside. At the back of your mind, you have to know that the blood vessels are going to be having three kind of the layers: the tunica intima, which is going to be the innermost, and then the tunica media, which is going to be a muscle layer with a smooth muscle layer, and then the last one outside, which we call the tunica externa. Let's go ahead and see each one of them and see how they're going to be arranged, starting from inside going outside. Okay. When you come over here on these blue lines, which are going to be lining this kind of the lumen of what we call the artery, these kind of the cells which are lining here are what we call the endothelial lining. They're exactly the same for the case of what we call the veins. Okay, so now these beautiful kind of the blue cells which are going to be lining, which are what we call the simple squamous epithelial cells, are what we call the endothelial lining. Okay, what we call endothelial lining. Okay, and it's going to be the same on both sides. It is such another beautiful thing. Now, as you come out slightly a bit out, you're going to be seeing this kind of other kind of the layers of cells which are going to be a bit black. See the kind of this beautiful layer after what you call the endothelial lining is also going to be the same for the case of what you call the veins. Now, those kind of the layer is what we call the subendothelial layer. Okay, so now this one here is what we call the subendothelial layer. What we call the subendothelial layer. Okay. Now, these two layers together, they are going to be making up what we call the tunica intima. Okay, so now these two layers, which are calling the endothelial lining, and what we call the subendothelial layer together, they make what we call the tunica interna. Okay, what we call the tunica interna. It is such another beautiful thing. So now this is what is going to be now our first inner layer, which is going to be having what we call the endothelial lining and what we call the subendothelial layer. Okay. Then again, moving a bit slightly outside what we call the subendothelial layer, we're going to be having this kind of a beautiful kind of this layer, which is super very important. This one is a bit like a bit red. Okay, which is like a bit reddish. It is going to be the same for the case of what we call the vein. You see that kind of this beautiful layer, which is like a bit reddish. Going to be wrapping around what we call the subendothelial layer. So now that kind of beautiful layer is what we call the internal elastic lamina. Okay, is what we call the internal elastic. What we call the internal elastic lamina. Okay, the internal elastic lamina. It's going to be the same for both sides, both the veins and what we call the arteries. Okay, Now, as you move out from what we call the internal elastic lamina, then you come to what we call the mass layer. You see this green layer and the thick layer of what you call the arteries. This is going to be what we call the tunica media. When you see on the thickness of what you call the tunica media for the case of the arteries, it's going to be a bit different for what we call for the veins. For the case of veins, it's going to be a bit thinner compared to what we call the arteries. So now this one here is going to be what we call the tunica, the tunica media. And of course, the tunica media, this one here now is going to be now our second layer, and it's going to be our middle layer. It's going to be made up of what we call smooth muscles. That's going to be mainly regulating what you call the diameter of what you call the lumen of what you call these kind of blood vessels. Whenever they contract, they are going to be narrow. They increase the resistance to what we call to the blood flow, and by doing that, it's going to be raising what we call the blood vessels. It's going to be innervated by what we call the sympathetic neurons. Okay, when you look on the tunica media, as you come out on what we call the tunica media, on its last end, between the tunica media and another kind of the red layer outside, is another kind of layer of cells there. See that kind of this beautiful layer, that kind of the layer which is a bit somehow like a bit bluish. Okay, when you come on what we call the veins, it's just labeled like a bit black. That kind of the layer just after what you call the tunica media. You know how that kind of the layer is called? That one is what we call the external elastic lamina. Okay, is what we call the external, elastic, what we call external elastic lamina. Super, very, very important. So now the external elastic lamina and internal elastic lamina, those two layers are super, very important whenever this kind of the arteries are undergoing what we call contraction or what we call the stretching and even also the recoiling process. They're going to be having a very much developed kind of the internal and then external elastic lamina arteries than what we call in veins. In veins, is going to be a bit thin, or even some other veins you may not find what we call the elastic lamina, because the veins they don't experience too much of the stretching because they are low pressure system. But for the case of arteries, they have well developed kind of the elastic lamina because they are going to be experiencing high pressures which causes them to stretch and then even have to recoil back. Okay, it is such another beautiful thing. So now when we come out of the outermost layer, you see this kind of beautiful layer which is a bit red, still wrapping around the whole of that kind of the layer. It's going to be the outside layer, and even when we come to the veins, this one is going to be outside here. That kind of the layer is what we call the tunica externa. Okay, is what we call the tunica, externa. Okay, what we call the tunica externa. In some other people, they even call it what we call the tunica adventitia. Okay, so now it's going to be the outermost kind of the layer, which is going to be serving this kind of the roles, like for example, the protection, even anchorage to the surrounding structures, and even also is also going to be serving a role of what we call regulating the stretchability of what we call of these blood vessels. And when you check again, you have this beautiful kind of the blood vessels which are going to be supplying blood to what we call to the tunica externa, and even some little part of the external parts of what we call the tunica media. Okay, so also have this kind of these blood vessels which are going to be serving blood to what we call the tunica externa and what we call the tunica media, the outer layers of this kind of these two layers. These beautiful kind of blood vessels here are what we call the vasa vasorum. Vasa vasorum. Okay, so now those are the beautiful kind of the blood vessels which are also going to be supplying the tunica externa and even also what we call some little outside parts of what we call the smooth muscle layer, which is the tunica media. Okay, and even also same applies on what we call the veins. These are going to be what we call our vasa, vasorum. Okay, vasa vasorum. It also such another beautiful thing. To finish it all, in the center here, we're also going to be having a network of blood capillaries. Okay, we're going to be having what we call a network are going to be having a network of capillaries. Okay, network of capillaries. Okay, so we said that the capillaries are going to be located in between what we call the arteries and what we call the veins. Okay, that briefly covers in the simplest way possible the tunic layers of what we call the blood vessels. So now in the next video, we are going to go ahead and look at what we call the blood vessel characteristics. We see those kind of the features which are going to be differentiating these kind of the two blood vessels, especially what we call the arteries and what we call the veins. So go ahead and see what are those unique characteristic features which defines an artery and is different what we call to the vein. That's going to be covered in the next video. Thank you very much for watching, and if you think whatever I've talked is making sense, it's really adding to you, you're benefiting, please can support me, and that one can be done in a couple of minutes. You hit the like button, comment down in the comment section, and please subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. As always, TUMNAD. Until we meet next time.